Animation, often seen as harmless entertainment, also served as a powerful cultural mirror, reflecting and amplifying the prejudices of the eras in which it was created. This timeline explores the troubling history of racist stereotypes embedded within many foundational public domain and early studio cartoons. These images, once widely accepted as comedic relief, reveal deep-seated, insidious societal biases regarding race and ethnicity. Understanding this history is crucial to grasping the enduring power of visual media.
The earliest forms of American animation emerged directly alongside the popular vaudeville and minstrel circuits, borrowing heavily from their visual tropes and performance styles. Figures like the Sambo character and overtly racist jokes were instantly recognizable to audiences steeped in minstrel traditions. These cartoons solidified the transfer of live-action racist caricatures into the easily reproducible medium of film.
In the 1920s, studios like Fleischer often used animation to depict black characters as primitive, hypersexualized, or outright monstrous figures, reinforcing colonial-era narratives. These short films frequently played on fears of the jungle or urban black communities, stripping the characters of human complexity and empathy. The early reliance on these shock caricatures established a precedent for offense that would persist for decades.
By the 1930s, the visual language of minstrelsy, featuring extremely exaggerated lips, thick accents, shuffling movements, and often tattered clothing, was deeply integrated into the golden age of animation. Even celebrated early works by Disney and Warner Bros. Included frequent cameos or plot points centered on these offensive tropes. Caricatures of Black Americans often appeared as dim-witted servants or frightening, superstitious natives.
One of the most enduring and pervasive stereotypes involved the obsessive association of black characters with foods like chicken and watermelon, suggesting gluttony or childish simplicity. This seemingly minor visual gag was rooted in post-Civil War attempts to infantilize newly freed slaves and limit their humanity. When animated, these tropes became instantly accessible shortcuts for defining racial identity in negative terms.
Cartoons frequently relied on scenes set in fictionalized African jungles to introduce native characters, invariably drawn with bone ornaments, grass skirts, and fierce, savage expressions. These depictions relied entirely on colonialist views of Africa as uncivilized and barbaric, serving primarily as a threat to the white protagonists or as figures of slapstick comedy. This reinforced global prejudices against indigenous African populations.
The depiction of East Asians in 1930s and 40s cartoons was often filtered through extreme yellow peril xenophobia, portraying them as sinister, mysterious, or hopelessly effeminate. Female characters were often shown as dragon ladies or geishas, while men were frequently drawn with extreme buck teeth, slit eyes, and lengthy queues. These visuals helped create an other that American audiences could fear or ridicule.
In depictions of Hispanic characters, the most common stereotypes centered on profound laziness, often symbolized by a figure sleeping against a cactus wearing a sombrero, sometimes called the Mexican siesta trope. This depiction erased the realities of labor and culture, presenting Mexican identity as inherently indolent and backward. This stereotype persisted far longer than many others.
Stereotypes were not limited to people of color. Jewish characters in some 1930s cartoons were often portrayed using grotesque anti-Semitic imagery, emphasizing large hooked noses, greedy expressions, and an obsession with money. These portrayals borrowed directly from centuries-old European propaganda. Though sometimes coded, these visual signals were clear to contemporary audiences, leveraging existing societal hatred. With the start of World War II, animation became a key tool for military propaganda, and racist portrayals of the Japanese reached an apex of vitriol and dehumanization. Japanese soldiers were drawn as demonic vermin or insects, almost uniformly featuring buck teeth, thick glasses, and often speaking in pidgin English. This extreme xenophobia justified military actions and reinforced public hatred. Native American characters were consistently relegated to the roles of bloodthirsty, warmongering savages or simple-minded figures in need of civilizing. Cartoons relied on highly inaccurate and insulting depictions of culture, dress, and speech, often reducing complex societies to violent threats or objects of ridicule. These images helped perpetuate the myth of the hostile wilderness needing conquest.
Towards the late 1940s, a faint shift began as the overt, extreme depictions of blackface started to become less frequent in new studio output, primarily due to changing tastes and internal studio policies. However, the basic premises of ethnic humor, relying on easily recognizable, demeaning visual shorthand, remained central to cartoon comedy. This period was one of transition, not true reform.
A critical moment occurred in 1968 when United Artists, then owning the rights to the pre-1948 Warner Brothers cartoons, formally pulled 11 specific films from distribution. These shorts, dubbed the Censored 11, contained the most egregious and sustained examples of racial caricature, particularly those featuring overtly racist black stereotypes. The decision marked a formal acknowledgement of the harm caused by these works.
As the civil rights movement gathered strength in the 1950s and 60s, public tolerance for overtly racist media rapidly diminished, leading to greater pressure on film distributors and television networks. While blackface effectively vanished from new productions, stereotypes of other groups, particularly the siesta Mexican and the drunk Irish, often continued to appear. The bar for acceptable humor was slowly but unevenly being raised.
In later decades, when these public domain cartoons were shown on television, networks often attempted to mitigate the offensive content through editing or by adding disclaimers. However, heavy censorship often ruined the historical context of the animation, and the attempts sometimes failed to address the foundational racism that permeated the entire structure of the joke or character. Contextualization proved difficult.
Because many of these early films entered the public domain, they exist in a state of perpetual availability, complicating efforts to control their distribution or provide mandatory context. This free circulation means that viewers, particularly children, may encounter these highly offensive images without necessary historical framing. The uncensored versions continue to circulate widely online and on cheap video collections.
Stereotypes aimed at Latino groups, especially the caricature of the lazy or simple-minded sidekick, proved stubbornly persistent, appearing regularly even in animations stretching into the late 20th century. These depictions often relied on poor Spanish language approximations and exaggerated costuming, reinforcing the idea of Central and South America as fundamentally less developed or serious than the U.S.
Viewing these racist historical artifacts must shift from casual entertainment to an educational imperative, recognizing them as case studies in propaganda and cultural bias. Filmmakers and scholars now utilize these cartoons to dissect how structural racism was visually codified and transmitted to millions of viewers. They are powerful evidence of systemic prejudice hidden within popular art.
Today, major studios that own the rights to more modern but still problematic cartoons often choose to stream them with mandatory contextual warnings rather than censoring the content entirely. This approach respects the integrity of the historical artifact while acknowledging its undeniable harm. However, the debate over whether to show or hide continues to rage within media ownership circles.
Ultimately, understanding these historical cartoons requires both recognizing their cinematic significance and confronting their painful legacy. These pieces of animation are essential tools for studying how racism was manufactured and distributed through popular culture. They serve as a permanent, albeit difficult, reminder of how far media representation has evolved and how vigilantly we must guard against the insidious power of stereotypes in entertainment.